This is Matthew Cratter from Trader University, and today I want to talk about Bitcoin and a few other different crypto like Monero, Grin, and a few others. I often get this question, why do you keep ignoring crypto XYZ, whatever XYZ is? You're intellectually dishonest and hiding the truth about XYZ, probably because you are secretly accumulating it. I've got a few DMs recently that say that, and I just want to disclose publicly, actually, I'm just really busy. There are 19,000 cryptos out there, and I get so many emails and DMs and questions every day about lots and lots of different cryptocurrencies, and it'd be impossible to cover all of them. Many of them are just outright scams. Many of them are poorly constructed, but I want to talk a little bit about my approach here. And I should say at the outset, I only own BTC, I only own Bitcoin, and I'm not secretly accumulating any other crypto. These markets are very deep. Many of them are. And so if I wanted to, I would accumulate it and I'd still be able to tell you. But if you've been watching this channel, you know the reasons why I'm what you might call a Bitcoin maximalist. I was able to call both the Luna implosion and the Celsius implosion, but I won't be able to warn you about every Ponzi and every scam out there. And I know that a lot of people want to vet their cryptos by running them by me before they buy them. But unfortunately, there are just too many of them out there, and this space is always rapidly changing. Also, I'm not the anointed risk analyst for the whole crypto space. This is a huge space. It's hugely complicated, and I really approach it from a Bitcoin perspective, but I do that really from some first principles that I want to teach you about in this video today, because I want to teach you techniques, hacks, approaches that you can use to analyze any new crypto yourself, because you shouldn't be buying or not buying anything based solely on my opinion. Again, nothing on this channel is investment advice. You have to do your own research and make up your own mind, but I disclose and share my own research and what I'm doing here just for your reference. Even if I turn out to be right about a certain cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, you personally will not have the conviction to hold through all the volatility if you don't believe in it also deep down in your bones, and if you haven't done your research. Some of the things that I try to avoid: if a crypto's had a large pre-mine, if it's held by venture capitalists like Solana, if it's being promoted by a guy wearing a Gucci jumpsuit doing a peacock dance, then I'm probably going to pass. So what I'm going to be talking about in this video is what you might call heuristics or rules of thumb that are sort of mental shortcuts that allow you to quickly take a look at a new cryptocurrency and realize what is wrong with it. Now, maybe I'll miss something using these heuristics, but I doubt it in this space because we've seen a lot of the tricks, and we've seen a lot of the tricks and how they fail. For example, a large pre-mine is a great way of rooting incentives from the start. This is the image that I'm often sharing. We can see what a huge pre-mine Solana and Binance had, but really all of these had large pre-mines. And the reason you give people tokens in a pre-mine is so that they can eventually dump them. And unfortunately, retail investors end up usually being the bag holders when this happens. I do talk about Bitcoin's fair launch, its decentralization, and I often get this question, why don't you cover Litecoin or Monero or Grin, which also had fairly decentralized fair launches? People are trying to say as well that Grin is not a security. It's not an unregistered security for this reason, that it's more commodity like Bitcoin. Well, I'll tell you why I don't like Grin, in spite of the fact that it had a fair launch, and I'm going to assume it had a fair launch. I haven't dug too deeply, but it looks fair to me. Fair distribution, did not have a pre-mine, and it also runs on proof of work, which I like as well. If something is proof of stake, for me, it's a non-starter. This is just a way of recreating the current fiat financial system if you allow those with the most coins to have the most power over the network. That's what proof of stake means. And proof of work really is the real innovation in Bitcoin that gives it the potential, at least, to be a neutral new form of money. So Grin did have this fair launch. It has proof of work. Technically, yes, it's true that it had these, but it would appear that at this late point in time, or whenever Grin came out a couple of years ago, it was already too late to launch a new fairly distributed proof of work crypto. There's some other examples of this, I think. I haven't been able to find them this morning, but I think you'll find something similar if you compare this to Grin. If you do a new launch like this, even if it's neutral, even if it's a new proof of work system, token holders will just dump your coin for Bitcoin. This is exactly what happened to Grin. Looks like this chart goes back to early 2019. It's just been straight down. This is, if this chart is moving up, that means Grin is getting stronger versus Bitcoin. If it's moving down, it means that Grin is crashing relative to Bitcoin. So what happens to these launches, even if you try to recreate what Satoshi did and do even a more fair distribution than he did, because it was just him at the beginning mining Bitcoin, etc. Again, he's never sold any of that. He's never moved any of that, unlike Vitalik Buterin, for example, who dumped 25% of his Ethereum. Even if you can do this and do something like Grin, and it seems like Grin did a lot of things right, it still doesn't work because Bitcoin is larger. Bitcoin has this head start. And what you end up doing, you can give people free Grin. You can do it in a very fair way. But what the market will do is it will dump that new token and buy Bitcoin. This is what we saw happened as well with the hard forks of Bitcoin. Bcash, BCH tried to hard fork Bitcoin, and it did not do it successfully. We can see here the BCH BTC cross, and we can see how BCH has lost value over time to Bitcoin. BCH Bcash is now a tiny fraction. Its market cap is a tiny fraction of Bitcoin's, and it is very vulnerable as well. If just 5% of Bitcoin miners decided to do a 51% attack on BCH, they could do it perpetually, simply because Bitcoin is so large compared to Bcash. So you can't recreate Bitcoin by doing a proof of work fair launch coin. You can't fork Bitcoin. BSV tried this, forking out of BCH. There are lots of coins that have tried this, but they end up dumping versus Bitcoin. And unfortunately, naive retail investors are usually left holding the bag, hoping that these things are going to come back. I can tell you, Grin is never coming back. BCH is never coming back. These are dead projects that have been trailing off over time and losing value versus Bitcoin. You want to measure your returns not just against fiat like US dollars or euros or yen, but you want to measure them against Bitcoin as your opportunity cost, as a way of demonstrating your opportunity cost of not holding Bitcoin and instead holding Grin or Bcash. The cat is out of the bag how to launch a new crypto. It's been done really only once, and it's very hard to do it again in a neutral, high-minded way like Satoshi did. The immaculate conception, as I like to call it, happened only once, and that was Bitcoin. It was a historical accident that cannot be repeated because the cat's out of the bag. If you try to repeat it, people will assume that you are just dumping on them, whether it's a slow motion dump or a fast motion dump. The other thing about Bitcoin is it didn't even have a price for much of the time that the founder was involved. Only towards the end did it have a more liquid price. And so it was this very high-minded, geeky endeavor, not a fast or slow motion pump and dump. It's very different. If you start a new coin and it's backed by venture capitalists, what do you think is going to happen? They have to sell dump the token eventually to pay their LPs and their investors. Satoshi and the cypherpunks were fairly high-minded people, it would appear. They weren't that interested in money. They were much more interested in ideas. And so you can see this difference compared to any new project, which needs a way of motivating people, needs to pay people, and it does this. These new projects obviously do by issuing tokens, which end up getting dumped. So what's wrong with Grin? As I said, probably nothing. It just had the bad luck to come after Bitcoin. And even if Grin had succeeded a little better than it did, it would never have been able to catch up with Bitcoin and Bitcoin's network effects, its global brand, its high hash rate, its mind share, etc. If we look at Grin's market cap right now, it has a market cap of 7 million. And so if you see a project that's crashed like this and it has a very tiny market cap, we can see the 24-hour volume is $64,000, $65,000. This is never going to come back. It's just too small for even high net worth investors to get involved with. And so unfortunately, there are a lot of these coins that still have people who stand by them. But when you see something this tiny that's crashed against Bitcoin, has very low daily volume, this is one way I pass on a new crypto. Let's go through some other comments from some of you. This is from Random Stuff from a couple days ago. For me, the main problem is there's nothing to stop another blockchain with fixed supply coming along and superseding Bitcoin as a store of value narrative. Perhaps Musk, Bezos, and Dorsey get together, decide to launch their own store of value coin for purely altruistic reasons, distribute it evenly to the whole world. Bitcoin is most definitely not evenly distributed, and we're off to the races. I know this is all very unlikely, but there's also absolutely no reason why it can't happen. BTC is boring. It does nothing and will not capture the imagination of the coming generations. I think this is one of Bitcoin's advantages, is that it is boring. People know what it's going to do, and you want your money to be boring. You want it to be predictable. You don't want it to be changing overnight like things like Solana and Ethereum do. Besides, the store value narrative is the biggest story in town. This is the biggest use case for money, because you'll be storing not just today, the world's wealth today in Bitcoin, but all the future wealth that is being created. And the example I always give is when someone discovers a cure for cancer or discovers how to do nuclear fusion or something like this, in 100 years from now, they will become very rich, and it's quite likely they will store a lot of that wealth in Bitcoin as a store of value. So the answer to this comment is yes, there's technically nothing to stop another blockchain from trying to do this. We've just seen so many examples like Grin that have tried to do it where they went to zero. And I think if something like this happened, even if it was fairly distributed, I think individuals, the market as a whole, would sell this new token, even if it was backed by Musk and Bezos and Dorsey and other sort of celebrity power. They would still choose to sell it for Bitcoin. This is empirically what we've seen happen every single time, and there's no reason to think otherwise. If it became a much more centralized coin, like this was the Elon Musk coin that he controlled, again, that would be great. He's a charismatic personality. He's weird, but it would not be a decentralized project in that case. It would be looking to the great leader, as in the same way that people look to Vitalik as the great leader. Here's another comment from Random Stuff that I thought was really good. How decentralized was BTC a week after Satoshi released it? Not in the slightest, and this is true. This is the miracle of Bitcoin, that it was able to move from centralization to decentralization. And this is what the immaculate conception involved. It's very, very difficult. I think it's impossible to recreate it. Random Stuff says, what took Bitcoin 12 years might only take a new chain 3 years. Unfortunately, when you have a pre-mine, when you have a launch, when you have venture capitalists, when you have powerful developers behind a new coin, it's very difficult for them to let go in the way that Satoshi did and made himself vanish from the project. This is, especially with pre-mines, it's very difficult for anyone to walk away from one of these, or for us to trust that anyone will walk away. And so I think this is a very unlikely possibility that you get a new chain that starts out centralized and becomes decentralized. This is the sort of thing that can only happen once. Random Stuff goes on to say, many lessons learned, newer tech. What is the impregnable moat that Bitcoin has? I just don't see it. It's just computers with an internet connection and a narrative. Again, this is the magic of what Bitcoin is, but don't underestimate the narrative. Don't underestimate the story. The United States was just a story. We had this revolution. We had this new way of setting up government, and there are lots of other ways to set up government. Our government has devolved over time. Unfortunately, we haven't kept the promise of the American founders, but don't underestimate the power of a narrative, the power of social consensus. And in a weird way, Bitcoin's impregnable moat is really just that it's been around. It's been around as long as it has. It has the Lindy effect working for it, which says that for non-perishable items, the longer something has been around, the longer it's going to be, or the higher probability that it will continue to be around. So the fact that Bitcoin's been around for 12 years, the Lindy effect tells you that it really should be around for another 12 years. It's probably going to be around for another 1,200 years. Then he gives the example, Random Stuff in this YouTube comment gives the example. I'm sure that a week after Facebook launch, people were saying it'll never catch up with MySpace. This is a very misleading analogy, because it was very easy early on to have an account on MySpace and then to open up an account with Facebook as well. And it didn't cost you anything, because these were, at least on the surface, free services. That they were underneath that they were harvesting your privacy, but they were free services. It didn't cost you anything to have accounts at MySpace and Facebook, and so you could go along with Facebook and just see if anything happened. This is very different from money. If you want to buy Grin, you need to sell your US dollars or you need to sell your Bitcoin to do it. There's no easy way of getting both of them. And again, we've seen what happens even if you try to have a fair distribution that's free. What happened with Grin is everyone ended up dumping it for Bitcoin. Random stuff goes on to conclude. There'll be a slow bleed out of Bitcoin as people realize how useless Bitcoin is for anything other than being a store. I think he means a store of value. Again, store of value, largest use case in the universe, hundreds and hundreds of trillions of dollars. I can't imagine any use case that would have a larger market cap than a coin that won the race in store of value. So I'm not sure Random Stuff realizes what a large use case that is. Next, I want to talk about Monero, which always comes up on this channel. People constantly asking me about it. Monero has really gone nowhere in BTC terms since its launch. It's back down to the same prices it was trading at in 2014 relative to Bitcoin. And in the process, it has never been able to catch up to Bitcoin's market cap. Monero currently has a market cap of around 2 billion. Bitcoin obviously closer to call it like 400 billion. And so this makes a really big difference. If you want to have larger investors come in, if you want to have institutional investors, you need liquidity, you need as large a market cap as possible. And if you don't have that, it's very difficult to catch up. Monero is a very cool privacy tool, but I think of it more as being a privacy tool than a new form of money. It definitely takes a different approach from Bitcoin. What Monero does is it shouts its privacy benefits from the rooftops. And that's great for buying drugs on the dark web or something like that, but it doesn't make it easy to get listed on an exchange when you have the same emphasis on privacy. Coinbase lists BTC obviously, but has never listed XMR, and there are very few exchanges that you can use to buy Monero or XMR. Most coins listed on Coinbase are actually complete garbage. And this is one of the ironies, because I do think that XMR is probably number two. If you had to force me to pick my favorite cryptocurrency or the only decent cryptocurrency after Bitcoin, it would probably be Monero. That being said, I don't own any Monero. I've never held it. And I think, unfortunately, Coinbase will never list Monero since it could run into these KYC, know your customer, anti-money laundering problems with the government. So Bitcoin is a better Trojan horse than Monero. Monero never even gets in the gates. You have to be listed on exchanges. You have to begin to tempt institutional investors if you want to take over the system. And XMR in many ways is very pure and it really does emphasize this privacy element. But as a result, it's not able to really get a foot in the door, and it's been unable to grow its market cap significantly for many years, unlike Bitcoin. Now, privacy, I would say, really is a niche interest. It's incredibly important, and I do think that Bitcoiners often underestimate its importance. I do like people who hold Monero, and I get along with them well, and I admire this emphasis on privacy. I consider them our brothers and sisters in the fight for privacy, but I do think that Bitcoin's NGU technology, its number go up technology, is a better marketing technique. And this is one reason that XMR has underperformed Bitcoin and failed to achieve a larger market cap. And as I said, you need that larger market cap. You need that liquidity in order to bring in the big institutional investors at some point. You also need your group to be rich, and Bitcoiners tend to be much richer than Monerans for this reason, simply because Bitcoin is appreciated much more. You need rich Bitcoiners if you want them to run for political office, or if you want to fund people who are friendly to Bitcoin to run for political office, become senators, become representatives in the House, become regulators, etc. And I think Bitcoin does a really good job of subverting the current financial system, both from within and from without. So obviously we're building a parallel system with Bitcoin, but it's also nice to try to insert it into Congress, to try to have a Bitcoiner president at some point, and work on subverting the current system both from within and from without. You're never going to be able to rally the masses around privacy issues, but you can rally them by engaging their greed. And this is what Bitcoin does. It transmutes greed and turns it into something very special, just like free markets do in general. Another reason I don't like Monero as a holding and why I've never bought it or held it is that you have these Bitcoin Monero atomic swaps where you can swap out of Bitcoin anytime you need to into Monero. And this ensures that there's no reason to ever hold Monero for the long term and use it as a store of value. You just store your wealth in Bitcoin, you store your savings in Bitcoin, and then if you ever need to spend your Bitcoin in a more private way, there are obviously private ways of spending it, which I do talk about in my courses. You can use a Lightning Network as well, which gives you a little bit more privacy. But if you want Monero's privacy, you can basically just use one of these atomic swaps, swap your Bitcoin for Monero, and then spend that Monero. If you ever receive Monero, if you're a merchant, for example, and want to save it for the long term, if you want the best store of value that will outperform everything else, it's rational to swap it back into Bitcoin using these same Monero Bitcoin atomic swaps. And if people do this, it's going to be very difficult for Monero to accrue serious value over time if people just swap into it or swap out of it temporarily, as we give in this atomic swap example. Meanwhile, Bitcoin privacy solutions will continue to be built on layer 2 and eventually layer 3, with the base layer remaining pseudonymous. And this is how Bitcoin works. The base layer is not anonymous, but it is pseudonymous. And I do talk about in my courses, as I said, how to use Bitcoin more privately today, how to buy anonymous Bitcoin, how to buy non-KYC Bitcoin, how to use things like CoinJoin as well. So there are definitely ways of doing it as well for the more advanced user. And you can check out the link in the description notes below if you want to check out how to do those things. It's important when you're considering new cryptocurrencies to remember that this is not just about the tech. It's not just about software. It's about a social consensus. Bitcoin is a social consensus, and it's a social movement. It's a really weird social movement because it includes a lot of people from both the right and the left and the middle. But nevertheless, it is this social consensus, and that includes things like we're never going to have more coins than 21 million. We use proof of work. We run a full node, etc. Bitcoin has a huge head start over every other project, including Ethereum and Monero. Bitcoin is not perfect, but it is good enough, and it might be as good as it gets when it comes to cryptocurrency when you look at all the trade-offs, which we'll do in a minute. The problem is the great monetary reset is already upon us. Bitcoin is the best that we have, and that's why I suggest that we all come together and rally around Bitcoin. Unless you're trying to scam someone and print up your own coin, then you'll want to create your own coin. But for those of us who are worried about the great monetary reset, I really think Bitcoin is the best tool that we have, and it's the only viable tool. It's not going to be a dog coin. It's not going to be a venture capitalist coin like Solana. It's not going to be centrally controlled garbage like XRP or Solana, and it's not going to be JP Morgan banker coin like Ethereum. And I'll link to this video below if you want to read more about the connections between JP Morgan and Ethereum. I want to conclude by talking about how engineering, and Bitcoin really is an engineering solution, how in engineering there are always trade-offs. And I think Bitcoin does a fantastic job of dealing with these trade-offs. With Monero, for example, you have this question of being able to audit the supply versus privacy. Bitcoin makes the choice to give up some of this privacy on the base layer in exchange for being able to audit the maximum supply of Bitcoin and make sure there are no inflation bugs. Bitcoin does a good job, I think, as well, dealing with the number of transactions per second. One way that Bitcoin scales is you have each transaction. So Bitcoin can only handle something like 4 TPS, 4 transactions per second. But one way that Bitcoin can scale is by having each transaction be a much larger amount. So at the beginning, each transaction was maybe $100. When Bitcoin reaches much fuller adoption, maybe each transaction will be $100 million or $100 billion. And in this way, you can still settle an enormous amount of value every 10 minutes in each new block. It's easy to have very high TPS in a centralized system, and a lot of new coins are highly centralized and they promise really high TPS in the way that Solana does, but then you end up losing out on decentralization. Solana has had a lot of problems here. It's constantly pausing the network. It's clearly a VC controlled coin. One nice thing about Bitcoin and its approach it takes to these engineering solutions is that it has layer 2 now. It has a number of layer 2s, but the most prominent is Lightning Network. This uses the same token as Bitcoin. It uses BTC, and it has the potential to still have millions of transactions per second on layer 2 that then settle in much larger chunks when the channel gets closed and they settle on the base layer, on layer 1. So Bitcoin uses a similar scaling solution to how the internet uses these various protocols that are layered on top of each other. Another thing that Bitcoin does, and we saw this with Bcash and Bcash crashing relative to Bitcoin, block size, a larger block size is not a good thing. If you have more transactions per second, if you have a larger block size, you'll end up with a larger blockchain. It can end up being too big, and in this way, not everyone can afford to run a node because you need to download a copy of that blockchain. And if you're somewhere that has a very slow internet connection, and you don't have a lot of processing power in your computer, then you end up not being able to be part of the Bitcoin consensus. And Bitcoin wants to make running a full node accessible to everyone. So if the blockchain gets too large, you lose out on decentralization. And this is what's happened with Ethereum, for example, a very large blockchain. And there are now companies like Infura that will run a node for you. And as a result, you end up with a lot of centralization. If you try to do faster blocks, people always try to come up with a new crypto and says, we can do a block every minute instead of every 10 minutes. If you do faster blocks, this leads to latency issues because you have to use the internet. It leads to node syncing issues, and it makes it very difficult for all the nodes to keep up and to stay in consensus. So faster blocks blow this up. They lead to node syncing and validation problems. Bitcoin handles all of these trade-offs quite well, and in addition, it's credibly decentralized. It was not decentralized when it was just Satoshi and Hal Finney, but it is now credibly decentralized. No one seems to be able to change the protocol, and Bitcoin also has credible forward monetary policy that no one can change. By contrast, Ethereum changes their monetary policy every few years. Bitcoin is the most anti-fragile, robust horse in the race. We just saw Luna blow up a couple weeks ago. You're going to see a lot of cryptos blow up or just go down and stay close to zero forever. Bitcoin is the most anti-fragile, robust project out there, and it has the greatest lead over every other project. It's highly unlikely that any new coin, even if it's really good, will ever be able to catch up. More likely is what will happen with Grin, where people dump the new token for Bitcoin instead. So when people ask you what is the next Bitcoin, I want you to keep this in your head. Bitcoin is the next Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the next Bitcoin, and it really will reward you to study and understand Bitcoin. And in this way, you'll be able to understand why it's going to become so large and why it will eventually become the store of value and the money for the entire world. If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe and like button. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.